So this is Jeff Anderson. Jeff Anderson again. And we're going to be doing the scoping meeting now. Tonight we have representation from the development team and the environmental consultant. So the first half of the meeting was just completed, was a community meeting. The second portion of the meeting will be the public scoping meeting for the EIR. And the scoping meeting tonight will be moderated by our environmental consultant, ESA, who's assisting the city in the preparation of the EIR. There's also a traffic assessment being done simultaneously by Fear and Peers, who are also included in tonight's meeting. Following tonight's PowerPoint presentation, there'll be an opportunity for the public to provide comments on the environmental issues. To ensure all attending the meeting have an opportunity to speak, comments will be limited to 1 minute per speaker, and Mike Harden from ESA will now begin the scoping meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Again, my name is Mike Harden. I'm with ESA. We are the consultant working with city staff preparing the Sequa documentation for the EIR for the project. I will be stepping us through a presentation to go over the Sequa process, as well as a brief description of the project, as I know the vast majority of us have been in attendance at throughout this community meeting as well. At the end of the presentation, we will address comments on the EIR. Thus, please hold any comments and questions until the end of the presentation. The City of Culver City, as the lead agency under Sequa, is holding this EIR scoping meeting to comply with the requirements of Sequa. Note that the project site is located in both the City of Culver City and City of Los Angeles. The City of Los Angeles will be a responsible agency under Sequa and will include involvement from the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, or LADOT. The objectives of tonight's scoping meeting are to provide information about the project and the EIR process, to identify the environmental topics to be analyzed in the EIR, and to solicit input from the community, agencies, and stakeholders on specific environmental issues and concerns that they would like to see addressed in the EIR. As we will discuss more later, the city is at the beginning of the environmental review process. For the next few slides, we will go over a brief presentation of the project, which will be followed by more information on the Sequa process. Again, some of this may be repetitive for those who were on the community meeting, but we will just provide a brief overview here as well. The project site is made up of 2 parcels, one in the City of Culver City and one in the City of Los Angeles. The project site is approximately 4.46 acres and is bounded by Venice Boulevard to the north, Washington Boulevard to the south, National Boulevard to the west, and existing commercial uses to the east, specifically the Helms Bakery District. Primary regional access is provided by the I-10 and I-405 freeways, as well as the Metro E line at Culver City Station. The project site is currently improved with low-rise warehouses that have been converted into retail, office, and storage uses, as well as surface and enclosed parking lots that serve the existing uses. This slide provides an overview of the key project components. I will cover these items in the next slide as we review the conceptual site plan. At a glance, the project will include up to 5 stories of office uses. This slide illustrates the conceptual site plan for the project. The project will include 536,000 square feet of office space within 2 4- to 5-story buildings with a maximum height of 75 feet. Accounting for existing uses on site, the net floor area would be 430,953 square feet. Shown on the site plan, Building 1 is located within the Culver City parcel. Building 2 is located within the Los Angeles parcel. A total of approximately 750 linear feet of landscape streetscapes would be provided along the project site frontages of Venice and Washington Boulevards. Widened landscape sidewalks would be provided on Venice and National Boulevards as well. The project would include 3 driveways, with 2 primary driveways with ingress egress, one each along Venice and National Boulevards, and 1 ingress only driveway along Washington Boulevard. 2 shuttle stops would be provided for Apple employees, 1 on Venice Boulevard and 1 on National Boulevard. A total of 1,215 vehicular parking spaces would be provided within 2 separate 3-level subterranean parking garages. A total of 162 bicycle spaces would also be provided by the project. Now I'll provide a brief overview of the Sequa and the Sequa process. The purpose of Sequa review is to inform the decision makers and the public of the project's potential environmental effects. The purpose is also to increase the public's understanding of and participation in the environmental review process. The EIR being prepared will disclose the potential impacts of the project on the environment and identify ways to avoid or reduce significant environmental impacts through mitigation measures or alternatives to the project. This slide presents an overview of the EIR process that is required by Sequa for the city. As you can see, there will be various opportunities for public input throughout the EIR process. Again, we are at the beginning of the EIR process, which began with the city distributing the Notice of Preparation, or NOP, indicating their intent to prepare an EIR. The distribution of the NOP initiated a 47-day scoping period to solicit comments on the content of the EIR, which is beyond the required Sequa 30-day scoping period. The NOP circulation began on November 4th, 2021, and comments on the content of the EIR will be accepted by the city through December 20th. This scoping meeting is part of that process. Again, the intent of the scoping meeting is to solicit comments from agencies, stakeholders, and the public regarding environmental issues they would like to see addressed in the EIR. All comments received during the comment period will be reviewed by the city and considered as the EIR is being prepared. Following the 47-day scoping period, the technical analyses for this EIR will be carried out. I will talk about the specific topics in the next slides. Following preparation of the draft EIR, a notice of availability of a draft EIR will be sent out by the city, and the EIR document will be circulated for public review and comment. At the close of that period, the city will review all comments received, and as required by Sequa, will provide responses to environmental comments raised pertaining to information in the EIR. The city will then prepare a final EIR that will include the draft EIR, responses to comments on the draft EIR, as well as any needed corrections or additions to the draft EIR. Upon publication of the final EIR, public hearings will commence, which will be another opportunity for public input. The city decision makers will then consider the information provided in the EIR and whether to certify the EIR prior to determining whether or not to approve the project. After the city makes their formal approval during the hearings, should they do so, they would then issue a Notice of Determination, or NOD, indicating their decision. This slide presents the list of environmental topics that were found to have less than significant environmental impacts based on an initial study completed by the city that is currently available on the city's website. These topics will not be further evaluated in the EIR. These topics include agricultural and forestry resources, biological resources, mineral resources, population and housing, public services as related to schools, parks, and libraries, recreation, utilities and service systems related to solid waste, and wildfire. To note, because the project does not contain residential uses, issues related to pop housing and public services shown here were found to have less than significant impacts. This slide includes a list of environmental topics anticipated to be addressed and analyzed within the draft EIR based on the initial study. These topics include aesthetics, air quality, cultural resources, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, noise, public services as related to fire and police protection services, transportation, tribal cultural resources, and utilities and service systems. For each of the topics listed on the slide to be addressed in the EIR, temporary construction-related impacts, long-term operational impacts, and cumulative impacts will be evaluated as necessary. Where significant impacts are identified, mitigation measures will be provided to the extent feasible to reduce impacts to less than significant levels. The EIR will also evaluate alternatives to the project to explore opportunities to reduce or avoid significant environmental impacts. The city will be preparing several focused technical studies for these specific areas in support of the EIR, including air quality, cultural resources, noise, and transportation. The city will also provide qualitative analyses for topics such as geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, and land use. Pursuant to Senate Bill 743 and City of Los Angeles Zoning Information, ZI File 2452, the project would have no significant impacts regarding aesthetics. However, an analysis disclosing impacts to aesthetics will be provided in the draft EIR for informational purposes. Thus, through the scoping period, our goal is for us to understand any comments and environmental issues related to these particular areas. For the next several slides, we will pass it over to Jeremiah LaRose with Fair and Peers, who is assisting the city with preparation of the transportation assessment for the project.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to show first the transportation assessment process. We understand that transportation is a subject that many people are particularly concerned with, and this is a process that we go through typically on studies such as this. We are at the very beginning, just like the rest of the environmental process, in the public comment on the notice of preparation period that you see on the left of this slide. And this is our opportunity to receive input from the community on the aspects of transportation that need to be studied in order to disclose potential impacts thoroughly in the EIR. In consultation with both the city of Culver City and the city of Los Angeles, we'll be determining the scope of the transportation study. So we incorporate the comments from the NOP with guidance and requirements from both cities in the study as the project involves development on both sides. We will conduct our transportation study and develop a draft for review by city staff. Somewhat unique to this project, although not, I shouldn't say truly unique, but specific to this project and perhaps less common because it involves development in both Culver City and Los Angeles. We'll receive comment and feedback from the city of Culver City, get review and input from Los Angeles Department of Transportation for their typical review process, revise the transportation study according to both cities' comments, and provide that back to Culver City for final acceptance and incorporation into the draft EIR. On the next slide, we'll see the transportation assessment for Sequa has changed somewhat. If you follow these sorts of things regularly in your community, you may know that the state recently required the use of vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, as the primary metric for evaluating Sequa transportation impacts. Both the city of Culver City and the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, LADOT, have recently updated their transportation study guidelines to comply with the new state requirements. And Culver City, in this case, will act as the lead agency on this study. This includes an analysis of VMT, adherence to the city's adopted programs, plans, ordinances, and policies, and analysis of effects on potential on-street hazards, which is sometimes referred to as geometric design hazards. The VMT analysis guidelines for Culver City reflect the fact that this project is being developed effectively immediately adjacent to the Metro E-line light rail train, and therefore, and along with that and the local bus routes serving the area, has access to very high quality transportation networks besides just single occupant driving. And therefore, the city of Culver City allows this project to be screened out from the VMT impact analysis, and therefore our finding for VMT would be less than significant. This information will still be analyzed and used for other parts of the Sequa analysis, including air quality, which is typical of our process. Next slide, please. We have a brief video here for those of you who may not be familiar with the concept of VMT or understanding why we are analyzing this as opposed to our more traditional methods, which we'll talk about as well in a moment. I'd like to ask this brief video to be played, which has some sound.
What is VMT? VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, refers to the distance that a car travels regardless of how many passengers are in the car. So this car, traveling 1 mile, would generate 1 VMT, and 4 vehicles, traveling 10 miles, would generate 40 VMT. To understand how much VMT a person generates on a typical weekday, it's useful to map their travel throughout the day. In this example, Jess starts the day at home, drives to the coffee shop 2 miles away, and then heads to work, which is 10 miles from the coffee shop. After a day at the office, Jess returns home 11 miles away. Later, Jess heads out and drives 1 mile to the gas station to fill up, before driving another 3 miles to the grocery store, and then makes the 2-mile trip back home. By adding together the miles driven, it is shown that Jess has generated 29 VMT for the entire day. This VMT can be further categorized into the individual trip purposes that motivated each leg of the trip. VMT can be organized into 3 typical trip purposes: home to work, or HW, home to other, or HO, and other to other, or OO. This organization is helpful in understanding that trips to and from work tend to generate the most VMT because people are willing to drive longer distances as the benefit of the trip increases. Do you have other questions about VMT that you would like answered? Let us know.
Great, thanks. One thing that I'd like to point out about VMT in our example is that each leg of that trip was done with driving. So each person who makes all of those trips driving generates a lot of VMT. And one thing that's very important in the state's transition to using VMT as a metric for Sequa transportation impacts is that when there is good access to high quality transit, bicycling, and walking, people have the opportunities to make all of those same types of trips without driving and without creating additional traffic congestion. And we hope that that will be an aspect of all the projects, but in particular, this one being very close to the train station takes advantage of changes in the state legislation that allows us to rely on that high quality transit network to assume that in the future, there will be no VMT related impacts as a part of the project. We do understand that this is a large project, and the City of Culver City's guidelines and the City of Los Angeles guidelines still permit for what we traditionally analyzed under Sequa, you may understand as intersection level of service or traffic operations, LOS. This is a series of non-Sequa analyses that will be incorporated in the transportation study that help us understand the potential impact to vehicle delay, to pedestrian safety, to transit operations, to driveways, all as part of the City of Culver City and LADOT guidelines for non-Sequa analysis. So this would not be included in the EIR as part of Sequa, but this information will be disclosed through city processes and investigated following methods that we have followed in the past, and some newer updates to incorporate more multimodal considerations, including transit, pedestrian, and bicycle safety. I think with that, I will pass it back to Mike.
All right, thank you, Jeremiah. Okay, moving on here. As indicated in the notice of preparation, the close of the comment period is on December 20th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Please provide your written comments to the city at the physical mailing address here or via email. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Jeff Anderson with the city at his email address. We do encourage you to provide written comments to the city before the close of the comment period. As we previously noted, there will be more opportunities for public comments once the draft EIR is completed and circulated and at the project approval hearing stage of the Sequa process. As a reminder, please keep in mind the EIR has yet to be prepared. Thus, your comments should be focused on what you want to see analyzed as part of the scope and content of the EIR. Comments on the scope and content of the EIR can be provided at this time during the EIR scoping meeting or via email to Jeff Anderson with the city at jeff.anderson@culvercity.org. If you'd like to provide oral comments now during the scoping meeting, you may do so by clicking the raise hand button in the Zoom application or by dialing *9 if you have joined this meeting by phone. Wait until the moderator calls your name and unmutes you to provide your comment. To ensure we get through all the comments, each commenter will have 1 minute to provide their comments, with each speaker having one opportunity to speak and provide their comments. In the event you do not get through the entirety of your comments, please submit your comments to Jeff at the city via email. In addition, for questions on the project not related to the scope and content of the EIR, the applicant representative can be reached via email at community@ccpmanager.com. With that, this scoping meeting will open up the scoping meeting for public comments. Our meeting moderator, Jacqueline De La Rocha, will call on commenters as hands are raised on the Zoom platform. Thank you very much.
Great. It looks like our first commenter is Marcus Baisley. You will be unmuted. You may unmute now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Marcus Baisley. I'm a member of the Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters, and I live in the area and I recreate in the vicinity of the project. And I also believe that I will be impacted by environmental impacts of the project. The city should require the project to be built utilizing a local and skilled and trained workforce. Local hire and skilled and trained workforce requirements reduce construction-related environmental impacts while benefiting the local economy. In a recent 2020 report titled "Putting California on the High Road, a Jobs and Climate Action Plan for 2030, the California Workforce Development Board concluded that investments in growing, diversifying, and upscaling California's workforce can positively affect returns on climate mitigation. Moreover, just this year, the South Coast Air Quality Management District found that the use of a local certified apprenticeship program or a skilled and trained workforce with the local hire component can result in air pollutant reductions. Other cities have not hesitated to apply skilled and trained workforce requirements for private development projects in their city. Recently, the city of Hayward in Northern California adopted skilled and trained workforce requirements into its general plan and municipal code. Local skilled and trained workforce requirements can boost economic development and mitigate transportation and green gas impacts, minimizing vehicle miles traveled. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for your comments.
Next, we have Eric Oh gosh. Pacel? You may unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm from the Arts District Residents Association, right in the residential neighborhood next door to you guys. And some of this has to do with EIR, but I also want you guys to publicize and leaflet our neighborhood. I know you said you put out like 1,000 flyers, but like those didn't go to our residents because most people didn't know about this meeting. We publicized it. But having to do with the traffic, I didn't hear a lot of emphasis on, because you guys are next to the TOD, you shouldn't need the parking spaces. So incentivizing transportation to the site, not in cars, but by the train, by the buses, and all that kind of stuff, and not build the parking. And I know that people keep saying, and this is a question for Jeff, like it meets the parking standards, but when were the parking spots revised? Like when were those set? 1970 or something like that? Now it's 2021. So we're moving into the 21st century. We need to revise the parking standards for buildings built right next to the train station. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your comments.
Okay, the next commenter is Bubba Fish.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. I would echo the sentiment of the caller before me. We keep hearing that the parking requirements are being met, but I don't know for certain if that means that there's more parking than the minimum. And either way, as the caller before me just said, parking minimums we know to be regressive. We know they harm communities by increasing car traffic. Beyond the entrance needing to be on Venice and not having an entrance on Washington, that would help obviously the car traffic here. But beyond that, even the biggest impact that we could make to this project to incentivize other modes is to remove so much of the parking. It's extreme to be right next to a train station and have 3 floors of underground parking. It's really unfriendly to the climate and to the traffic conditions here. So please consider that, and please consider working with the city to create a scramble crosswalk at Washington and National. Safety features like that make the environment more conducive to cycling and pedestrians. We have the platform on one side, the co-op and Access Culver City, Ivy Station, and Apple. Like, we need a scramble crosswalk to increase safety, to make sure people can get to where they need to go without a car, because all of those things matter to incentivizing other modes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bubba, for your comments.
All right, the next commenter is Tom Wolf.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me? Oh, great. Thank you all for the time tonight, and thank you for the presentation, Mike and Greg. Really appreciate the input and all the work that went into this. I certainly recognize how much effort goes into preparing for these. So thank you for putting that time forth. More importantly, as it relates to the scoping and the studies, the only piece I might point out, I'll try to limit it to the EIR scoping, I think really relates mostly to traffic, and I think a lot of comments have been made on that. We've learned a lot about traffic and patterns, and obviously the pandemic has impacted some of that, maybe to the better, but we're finding that it's been a challenge in terms of access. So recognizing that we're not necessarily studying level of service and only VMTs, and looking at the access points at the property that are proposed, I only maybe phrase or take into account those 3 access points, particularly the one on National. There was a lot of time spent in terms of installing a new traffic signal there between Washington and Venice. And I'm not sure if the alley access that's proposed is also contemplating another signal for the right in, right out or not. But I think that's something to really be thoughtful about and maybe make use of the existing traffic signal that's recently been installed. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your comments. And just so we are clear, as we move through public comments, these comments will all be considered as we are preparing the EIR. There will be a full transportation assessment report that is being prepared. So, while we don't have all of the answers yet as far as what the traffic impacts will be, these comments are very helpful for us to develop, the scope and content of what should be included in a traffic study. So, wanted just to keep that in mind, that these are great comments. And also I wanted just to note on timing, I know we are scheduled to 8 o'clock. However, if we do go beyond 8 o'clock, we will continue to finish comments until all commenters have had a chance to speak. If there are some specific comments that come up and we can address and provide responses now, we will as appropriate. Other straightforward comments we will just be taking as part of the record. So with that, let's keep moving on.
Sure, Mike. Next commenter is Ken Mand.
Hi, thank you. I have a few questions. Question one, why is this building design based on city jurisdiction? Municipal entities are experienced in dealing with projects that straddle two jurisdictions. Question two, why are you doing Culver City Sequa process first and LA Sequa and LA second when LA is bigger? Question three, is Culver City bearing the brunt of LA's building impacts? Also, please let it, some other items I'd like to bring up, the impact on the arts district, on the neighborhood. How does this project fit into the TOD visioning implementation or adopted TOD visioning study, as well as Move Culver City? How does this affect art district access to emergency services? Also, how does this play in with public transit? Also, please note that 100% of Arts District streets are cul-de-sacs, and all ingress and egress rely on Washington Boulevard. How does this play in with the city's complete street policy? Also, how does this play in with the city's pedestrian master plan? The community space, how can this be analyzed further to be a greater benefit to the community? And also aesthetically and the architectural context of the building, I believe, needs further analysis. Also, I'd like to lastly state that it is the expectation the comments from the first half of this meeting, since it was one Zoom, are considered as part of the EIR scoping. And please, while we have a moment, Jeff Anderson, if you could please advise why we are not able to see who else is on this meeting, and kindly ask that the screen be shared to reveal who is still in the meeting in the community. This is a public meeting. We should be in a public environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. We appreciate your comments. Jeff, if you have anything to add, please do so. I do want to note that Ken had mentioned a number of land use plans. The EIR, land use and planning EIR section, to which those applicable plans will be evaluated. Also on the transportation front, as far as emergency access, transit, and other transit-related impacts, those will also be included in the transportation section of the EIR as applicable. And keep in mind, as Jeremiah noted, the transportation assessment will include a Sequa component and a non-Sequa component, the Sequa components of which will be included in the EIR sections. And finally, I think there was Ken made a comment with regards to Culver City in Los Angeles. Culver City, as noted in the presentation, is the lead agency, with the City of Los Angeles being a responsible agency in terms of the Sequa process. So with that being said, thank you again for your comments, Ken. Jeff, did you have anything else to add on your front?
I don't really have much. I would say that keep in mind that there's a fairly big distinction between a community meeting and a scoping meeting, and there's only certain things that are reviewed under an EIR. It's not an open book. There is a list of issues to be reviewed, and so that's why we have the scoping meeting to focus on those lists, on that list.
Okay. Our next speaker will be Janine Wisnowski.
Yes, thank you. You did that perfectly.
Okay, good.
Both names. Thank you. Thank you for this meeting. I appreciate it. I missed the first 5 minutes, of this particular section. I'm wondering regarding the parking lots, if they're going to make sure that there are plenty of electric vehicle stations as our state is pushing for more electric vehicles. I'd like to see plugins, and I'm wondering how that number can be obtained, because I think that might help some folks with their concern for the parking garage, for the subterranean parking garage. So also the building of the neighboring projects, particularly the IB station, was and all those buildings surrounding there were a great headache for people who live in the area and also for commuters. And there was a lot of, I'm a person who lives in Culver City, but works in the evening somewhere else. And we were stopped and idling, which is not good for the environment, while those projects were happening. So I am wondering if there is going to be a study about how, or a plan how exactly to manage building a project such as this to minimize car idling, to help traffic go through. And if that comes with some people asking for an additional light, I don't know if that's possible, but I'd like to see this project handled, dare I say, a little better than that other project was, according, regarding traffic. And then regarding the green space, looking at the project, I really appreciate the generous setbacks. I see many projects built at the edge of the street, and they miss the opportunity for green space, for trees, grass, plants that we need to get oxygen to breathe. So I really appreciate that, and I'm hoping that the city encourages more projects like that. And I would like to know more about the public open space and actually how that would be accessed and what would go there, because we sure do need more parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine, for your comment. The issues you've raised will certainly be considered as part of the EIR process, and note that the project sustainable features that are being proposed by the applicant will be fully analyzed as part of the environmental impact analysis, including consistency with applicable plans and policies, as well as when we look at impacts such as greenhouse gas emissions and energy. So I just wanted to make that note. But excellent comments. And Thank you.
Okay.
And Jacqueline, I do want to actually just make one more comment. My understanding is that the project is the EV parking will be above code requirements. And that will all be laid out in the EIR.
Okay. Our next commenter is Dylan Gottlieb.
Gottlieb, that's correct. So I just want to go back and circle back to what I talked about with the project themselves about parking minimums. And there was a none answer there because, you know, the city creates these parking minimums, and I believe these businesses kind of rely on them and maybe perhaps use them as a crutch. So my question is, this is a TOD project. Having reduced parking seems quite reasonable, if not, you know, it should be demanded really in the location it is. So would the city be willing to reduce the parking for the developer so that they can take advantage of that? So yeah, that's what my question is. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan, for your comments. In the EIR will, in the traffic transportation assessment, will include an assessment on of parking. And at this point, if the city or if there's any members of the applicant team that wish to speak about parking, please let us know. Nonetheless, I think it's been stated that the project will provide parking in accordance with applicable city requirements. So hearing none, we will move to the next commenter.
Okay. The next commenter is Godfrey Wachira.
Oh yeah, hi, Godfrey Washira with Creed LA. I'd spoken during the community meeting. So mine is just a general question. First, I think there's a lot of good in the project. Just my general question is there a correlation between VMT and parking spaces provided? Yeah, that's it.
Jeremiah, do you have some input on that?
Yeah, I know a number, and thank you for your comment. I know a number of people have commented on this tonight. There is definitely a correlation between the availability of parking and the ease of access to something and the amount of VMT that happens. So, you know, consistent with what everybody has said tonight, we are conducting our EIR analysis based on the project description, which currently meets city code by law. We hear your comments and will continue to discuss with the team how parking could be an opportunity to address both Sequa and community impacts.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Okay. Next speaker is Bill Quisenberry.
Good evening, everybody. Real quick here, to be respectful of everybody else's time, particularly the residents that live in the area that might be affected by the project itself and the environmental issues. Bill Quisenberry, Liuna, Labor's International Union North America, representing Southern California District Council of Laborers. And I just wanted to place a comment at this point in time in the meetings because I was not able to get in at the public comment period for the community meeting. And we hope that this project is successful, passes the entitlement process, and is able to incorporate and employ some of our members who live in the West Los Angeles area, Culver City, surrounding communities. And we look forward to contacting the representatives from Trammell Crow. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Bill, for your comments.
Okay, next speaker is Oscar Reynoso.
Oscar, looks like you. Oh, there you
Okay,
are.
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, good evening. Boy, this is great. Like one of the first persons that went on about the notices going out about this meeting, in the prior projects, we've received notice, so we knew what was going on. So in the future, if something like this happens, it'd be nice to know what's going on. I've lived in this area since 1987, and I live between Venice and Washington. And the traffic here is just it's getting worse and worse. And with this new project coming on, I don't see the traffic getting any better unless they do something drastically to improve the traffic, the streets around here, accessible for both bikes and automobiles. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar, for your comments. And yes, the traffic impacts will, as required by Sequa, will be analyzed in the EIR. And also note, to ensure that we have you on future notices, please email Jeff Anderson your contact information, and we'll be sure that future notices are sent your way.
Great. The next speaker is George Montgomery.
Hey, I just wanted to express that in the lists of what should be included in the EIR or not, that population, housing, and VMT were all sort of identified as things that we're going to benefit from the transportation and the train. I mean, this project is a highly impactful project that's going to impact the community for 5 years. I would hope actually that we would thoroughly, scope and study population, housing, and VMT because of how it's going to directly impact traffic. Traffic is going to be the sensitivity point because of the particular unique scenarios with so many large companies and new groups of employees that are forecast into the next decade. So I would really express to the investigators of the EIR and the developer to really stretch to communicate with the community about the traffic impacts and listen and try to come up with innovative, unique solutions for this. This is a very unique intersection of trying to make things work here, adding 1,200 parking spaces and however many people. It's going to have a huge impact. So I would hope that all those things will be studied. Thanks.
Thank you, George. Just a couple quick notes on those fronts. As I've mentioned, there will be a transportation section of the EIR that will include a comprehensive VMT analysis. And with regard to population and housing, the initial study evaluation concluded that those impacts would be less than significant, and primarily due to the project being an office project. And that's specific in regards, in response to the Sequa checklist questions. However, I would encourage you to submit further written comments if you do have any more specific comments on the population and housing analysis included in the initial study. Based on the comments on the initial study, it is certainly possible that the scope and content of the EIR is broadened to include additional issues. And that really is the purpose of this call and us getting public input to consider those comments to make sure that the EIR is providing a full and comprehensive evaluation of impacts. So if you do have any specific comments on the initial study, please submit those in writing to the city.
Okay, our next commenter is Eric Marr.
Hi, I'm a arts resident as well, and I'm also an architect. So I have a couple of comments that build on what some of the other people have said. I'd like to reinforce the idea that housing should be a component of this project for multiple reasons, most of them obvious. The C2 zone, LA, allows for housing. So while the presenters said that their use is allowed by the current zone, it's not the only use allowed in the current zone. And I think housing should be included. I don't think the Culver City zone allows for that, but the LA parcel seems to be the larger one. So I think housing should be a part of this project. Second comment has to do with the sustainability and energy features of the project. So you said that it was gold equivalent. Presumably that means that you're going after some of the LEED gold points, but you're not, I would guess, going to go after the verification points. So the latest version of LEED, regardless of what you think of the certification process, and I know that it's onerous and expensive and all of the rest, but it does include verification for a year after the building is built. So a lot of people can make claims about how sustainable their building is, but with no verification. You also said that it would be 100% renewable energy. I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean net zero? Does that mean, living building standard? Does that mean no fossil fuels at all? What does that actually mean? Last point is, I tend to agree that parking codes should be a maximum and not a minimum at this point. But regardless of where you end up, I think that within the next decade at least, we're going to find that we're massively overparked as a society. So however the parking is designed, typically not very adaptive reuse friendly. And I think that this project should consider ways to make that parking, however it's designed, retrofittable for other uses in the future. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Eric. From an EIR perspective, we will further refine and the sustainability features that will be proposed by the project. So the EIR analysis will, for areas such as GHG, energy, will list and cite all of those proposed sustainability features. Those will all be considered in both the quantitative and qualitative analyses included in the EIR. But in the end, the EIR, will ultimately address those features that are being proposed by the project. So those will be, at the discretion of the applicant to provide, and it'll be the job of the EIR to analyze the environmental impacts. The ultimate sustainability features included as part of the project, I believe would be, enforced as conditions as the project if they were included in the EIR analysis and otherwise went above and beyond regulatory requirements. So if there's anything else the applicant team or the city would like to provide. Hearing none, I think we can move to the next commenter.
The next commenter is Kareem Sally.
Hey, it's me again. I'm glad to know that we have a little bit more time. I appreciate that. The initial study mentioned that the project should leave the TNP. I couldn't figure out what it is. What is the TNP? Who has authority over it? Is it Culver City? Is it Los Angeles or both city? That's my first question. I would like to get the housing component be part of the initial studies. The Apple is going to bring 3,000 employees. That's almost 10% of the city population. That will have an impact on the city. Knowing that the Apple will be able to throw some money in the housing bucket is nice, but I need to have that housing component part of the study. So is the design aesthetic. You mentioned it as it should be informational. I don't think so. I think the project is right next to an historical building and we need an actual aesthetic study. It's been mentioned several times that the project is meeting the city's requirement, but what are the TOD vision parking requirement? Because it seems to me the project is within that component, and I want to make sure that the applicant is following those requirements, not just the city's requirement. There's too much parking, obviously. We want parking maximum and not parking minimums. If the applicant is truly sincere about their environmental approach, then 1,250 parking spot is way too much, especially next to a metro station. Again, I will repeat, I would like to have just an entrance and exit on Venice Boulevard for both buildings. The previous commenters mentioned retrofittable parkings. And I fully agree, this is a great idea because parkings are pretty much doomed in the future. Maybe not in 5 years for sure, but probably in 30 years. And we need to think and take that into account. The consultant mentioned VMT travel. Will the study keep into account the current Move Culver City project, even if we don't know if that project will stay for good? How that study will be done with and without the project? How are you going to calculate that now that the numbers have been changed since the pandemic and with the installation of this new project? I would love to get all the bike lane fully protected. That thing, I think that will impact the traffic study. We do know that bikers enjoy protected bike lane because they simply don't want to die. So we need protected bike lane on both sides of National, by the way. And making sure that no shuttle bus can park on the bike lane itself, like it's happening already with the hotel. Another commenters mentioned park accessibility, and I want to repeat my comment from earlier. Widened sidewalks are great, but they do not qualify in any way, shape, or form as an open space. This is not Central Park. This is just a goddamn park sidewalk. It has trees, it has greeneries, it's great, but it's not a park. So please bring the indoor park outside so everybody can enjoy it. And finally, I'd like to have more transparency in that meeting. 2 times we ask you how many people and who was there part of the meeting. If it was an actual in-person meeting, we will know instantly. How come is it so hard to just get at least a number of people logged in today, in the first meeting and now? And who's paying for the study? How can we make sure that we have an independent study? We have reason to be worried that the richest company in the world will put every possible weight to get the things they want moving the way they want. I want to make sure that we're absolutely independent and not even able to get the transparency about the number of people on the call today is worrisome to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kareem, for your comments. If you'll give me just a couple seconds, I've got some notes here I was looking at. Just a couple. I know you raised a lot of great, thorough comments. I did want to just touch on a couple things. The TNP for the project is the Exposition Corridor Transit Neighborhood Plan, which is applicable to the city of Los Angeles parcel. So that particular amendment will be included and evaluated as part of the discretionary approvals for the project. All associated environmental impacts resulting from that discretionary approval will be included and evaluated as part of the EIR. As well as, other consistency with other land use plans and policies. With regard to applicable alternative transportation policies, the transportation section of the EIR will evaluate the project's consistency with applicable Culver City and Los Angeles transportation policies and plans. The landscaped areas, open space requirements, the project's consistency with those requirements will also be included in the environmental documentation. Currently, the initial study includes the public services impacts to recreation and parks. So if there are any specific impacts for those particular topics, we encourage you to provide additional written comments on those issues. With regards to aesthetics, the EIR will include an analysis of aesthetics impacts in line with Sequa checklist questions. However, we did note that because the project is in a transit priority and per the Senate Bill SB 743, as well as the City of Los Angeles Zoning Information File 2452, aesthetic impacts are not considered significant impacts. Nonetheless, for informational purposes, that a comprehensive aesthetics analysis will be included and disclosed as part of the EIR. So we will welcome any comments on that on the EIR aesthetics analysis. VMT, I think we've talked about VMT. The VMT impacts will also be analyzed as part of the transportation assessment and the EIR as well. Let's see. I think that covers the highlights of some of my notes. But nonetheless, we will consider all of these comments as during the preparation of the draft EIR. So thank you for your thoughtful comments.
Mike, could I just respond very quickly?
Yes.
I think one of the specific points there was a question easily answered about how is the analysis incorporating the Move Culver City project. So our baseline assumption for the non-Sequa analysis that the City of Culver City and Los Angeles DOT require, which would be the analysis of intersection delay, of neighborhood vehicle volume impacts, of bicycle and pedestrian safety, all of those elements will be analyzed per the local guidance. So it's not a Sequa element, but it will be disclosed as part of a separate transportation study. And our assumption at this point is to include the current configuration of the Move Culver City project as our baseline condition. So that will be considered as if it were incorporated in the future.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Okay. Jack?
Okay. Yep. Let's see. The next commenter is Stacy H.
Hello, good evening. I will be very brief. I just wanted to reiterate my concerns and in support of my neighbors, Mr. Babafish. His suggestion of the pedestrian scramble at National and Washington, I think, is spot on. It's obviously there's a need for reconsideration of that space, and I think that could be a great solution. Also, Mr. Kareem Salih, he mentioned the importance of the protected bike lanes. I had an opportunity to speak with somebody, Joe, from the TOD study. He mentioned that there aren't more ballards to separate in the arts district, to separate the bus and bike lane from the vehicle lane because of the folks who film along Washington. And I really think that's a disservice to the local community. I would love to see more protection to separate because we still, of course, see cars in those lanes. And finally, I just want to say, if there's any chance we could maybe sometimes define the acronym a little more often, it would be helpful for laymen like myself to keep up with some of the terminology. And thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Stacy, for your comments. And yes, if there are any acronyms we haven't described completely, I do apologize. We'll definitely be mindful of that.
Okay, the next speaker is David Metzler.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm sorry I got on a little late, so I didn't get to see the presentation, but I did want to point out something about the concern I have about the public notice and outreach on this meeting, because I knew about it because I ran into somebody on the street, so I knew it existed, but I tried to find it on the Culver City website, and I tried to find it in the meeting database, and I searched my email for any kind of notice from the city, and I couldn't find anything. So I spent a lot of time trying to find how to get on this meeting and had to text some folks in order to find out how to get on. So even if I knew it existed, I had a hard time finding it. So I think that might be something to look into in the future. And then I've heard a lot of discussion about parking maximums and what Apple might be able to do in that regard, because there's just, we're going to dig ourselves another hole that we've been digging over and over and over again with too much parking. And, you know, Apple is an innovative company. I'd like to know what they can do to reduce the amount of parking that they're going to build into it. And what the earlier speaker had suggested, any parking that is built, how can that be repurposed more creatively in the future? Because at some point it needs to become obsolete. Just because we can't accommodate the thousands and thousands of cars that are being built into these projects. So yeah, that's about it from now. I would like to see any kind of protected bike lane and pedestrian access between like Venice and Washington to encourage alternate modes of transportation that's so close to the transit hub of Culver City. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We appreciate your comments. You know, and as we've noted before, we understand the project will work to meet its parking requirements, and you know those will all be fully evaluated and considered as necessary as part of the EIR. And any of the project's alternative transportation bike facilities will also be evaluated as part of the transportation analysis included in the EIR as well. So thank you for your comments.
Okay. Next speaker is Elliot Mcbain.
Looks like Elliot is on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Oh, there you are. Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm an Arts District resident, and I'd like to know a few questions about the Washington entrance. Will the parking entrance use the existing parking entrance that's part of the new Apple building? Will the area described in the previous meeting as community open space be used for any car traffic as those cars are entering the building in that area? And the third question is, the Washington entrance was described as a secondary entrance and the National as a primary. I'd like to hear more about what differentiates a primary from a secondary entrance and if there's going to be any way of enforcing that. And a follow-on to that is how many parking spots will be serviced or accessible by each of the parking entrances coming into the different spaces.
Okay, Elliot. Some of those comments are specific about the project design. Do we have an applicant representative maybe to talk about some of the ingress egress?
Yeah, Mike, I'll go ahead and address that. So the difference between the primary and in this case the secondary is one that this is required for emergency support vehicles, again, as will be required whether it has other functions or not. And the primary accesses both have ingress and egress, and they will be signed with wayfinding and identified as the project entrances. This one, as it's currently anticipated, as it's currently being studied, is ingress only, and it is not suggested to be marked or dedicated or designated or noted as a primary entrance into the building. And that's a function of both size and location. But again, all of these things are going to be studied as a part of our traffic study to figure out how we can best optimize the circulation around the project.
Thank you, Greg. Oh, looks like we've got one more hand raised.
Yes, Patricia. Oh gosh, Be Joviet. Sorry. Patricia, you're on mute.
Am I?
No, you're.
Oh.
There you go.
Oh, there I go. Sorry. I wanted to add another point that I didn't hear. I am fully in support of the things mentioned about adding housing and reducing the amount of parking, because then, but the other point is the culture. Now we have the opportunity building a new structure between Ivy Station and the Helms Bakery. It would be so great if that would bring something substantial to the people living there and walking along Venice or Washington from the Ivy Station to Helms Bakery. And I think Apple would be the first to find out ways to make that bring culture and art in that experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for your comments.
Mike, I think that's everyone for new speakers or new hands that were raised.
Yes, in order just to move the meeting along, as we had noted, if there are any new speakers, please raise your hand. For anybody wishing to add or supplement to their prior responses, please provide written comments to Jeff Anderson at the city. So I think with that, I will turn the meeting back over to Jeff.
Okay, well, that concludes our meeting, and as has been expressed many times during these two meetings, that this is the very beginning of the process. We're still in the process of reviewing things, and a lot of things that have been brought up that we'll be considering and reviewing. So we thank everybody for participating, and we've taken note of the questions and comments, and we have those written down. And if you have any others or want to put those in writing, go ahead and do so and send it to my email. We'll continue to accept the comments through the 20th of December as the screen shows. So thank you, and wish everyone a good night.